Europe has 50 countries. France. The capital is Paris. Spain. The capital is Madrid. Portugal. The capital is Lisbon. United Kingdom. The capital is London. Ireland. The capital is Dublin. Iceland. The capital is Reykjavik. Norway. The capital is Oslo. Sweden. The capital is Stockholm. Finland. The capital is Helsinki. Denmark. The capital is Copenhagen. Germany. The capital is Berlin. Netherlands. The capital is Amsterdam. Belgium. The capital is Brussels. Luxembourg. The capital is Luxembourg. Switzerland. The capital is Bern. Italy.
Future. What happens when these pressures converge? The answer lies in understanding the subtle strategies already in motion. The EU's Achilles heel, internal fractures. The European Union projects an image of unity, but beneath the surface, deep fractures divide member states. These internal weaknesses make the bloc vulnerable to external manipulation. Three major fault lines split Europe along economic, political, and social axes. The North-South economic divide remains the most persistent. Since the 2010 debt crisis, northern economies like Germany maintain steady growth, while southern states like Italy stagnate, with youth unemployment reaching 30% in Spain versus 5% in Germany. These disparities fuel resentment when Brussels imposes austerity on struggling economies, while prosperous members resist fiscal transfers.
And they worry about the endless spiral of events they see on the news, from the devastating scenes in Gaza to the relentless Russian barrage on Ukraine. We simply cannot wait for this storm to pass. This summer showed us that there is simply no room or no time for nostalgia. Battle lines for a new world order based on power are being drawn right now. So yes, Europe must fight for its place in the world, in which many major powers are either ambivalent or openly hostile to Europe, a world of imperial ambitions and imperial wars, a world in which dependencies are ruthlessly weaponized. And it is for all these reasons that a new Europe must emerge. And honourable members, this must be Europe's independence moment. I believe this is our Union's mission, to be able to take care of our own defence and security, to take control over the technologies and energies that will fuel our own economies, to decide what kind of society and democracy we want to live in, to be open to the world and choose partnerships with allies, old and new. Ultimately, it is about having the freedom and the power to determine our own destiny. And we know we can do it, because together we have shown what is possible when we have the same ambition, unity and urgency. I must say I've lost count of the number of times that I was told that Europe could not do this and could not do that, in the pandemic, on the recovery plan, on defence, on supporting Ukraine, on energy security, and the list goes on. Every time Europe stood united and made it. And we need to do the same now. So, honourable members, the central question for us today is a simple one. Does Europe have the stomach to fight? Do we have the unity and the sense of urgency, the political will and the political skill to compromise? Or do we just want to fight between ourselves, be paralysed by our divisions? That is what all of us have to answer. Every member state, every member of this House, every commissioner, all of us. And in my eyes, the choice is very clear. So my pitch today is a pitch for unity. Unity between member states. Unity between European institutions. Unity between the pro-European democratic forces of this House. I'm here, and the entire college is here, ready to make this happen with you, ready to strengthen the pro-European democratic majority, because it is the only one that can deliver for Europe. Honourable members, freedom and independence are what the people of Ukraine are fighting for every day. People like
Turn of the millennium, real disposable income in the US has grown nearly twice as fast as in the EU, while China's economy continues to outpace them both. At the same time, the EU is pushing a green transition that could have devastating consequences for both our economy and standard of living. For the European Commission, the EU's equivalent of a government, climate policy is the top priority. In fact, according to the EU, the green transition is viewed as a matter of life and death.
The Paris Agreement continues to be the best hope for all humanity. But we are in a race against time.
Fighting climate change has become the greatest responsibility of our times. And this is why in Europe we have set our objective: to become the first carbon-neutral continent by 2050.
But achieving zero emissions demands a radical transformation of society and risks undermining our access to stable and affordable energy. In parts of Europe, signs of deindustrialization are already emerging. This raises the question: are the people of Europe truly willing to sacrifice their industry, their jobs, and their economic prosperity in order to reduce emissions?
Virtually every well-meaning person in the global political stage will tell you this is an existential problem. This is the end of the world approaching. This is something that's our generational mission to do something. No, it's not. It is one of the many problems in the world. So climate change is a problem. It's a 2 to 3% problem. It's by no means the end of the world. It's by no means the most important thing that's going to happen in the 21st century. And if we address it as if it is, we're very likely to get our priorities wrong.
Europe simply cannot maintain its competitiveness while at the same time growing increasingly dependent on unreliable energy sources. And if Europe's growth keeps slowing, we risk becoming a cautionary tale for the world, making major polluters think twice before phasing out fossil fuels. Join me on a journey to find out if the EU's policies on climate change, freedom of speech and business regulation will make Europe thrive, or if centralized control and political opportunism is pushing us all towards the fall of Europe. In the early 2000s, the EU was still the largest economy in the world. Today, it has been overtaken by both the US and China, and European real wages are rising at only half the pace of those in the US. The EU's top politicians are well aware of this situation. Last fall, former European Central Bank chief Mario Draghi released a report on Europe's competitiveness, calling it an existential challenge. The EU was founded to ensure prosperity, justice, freedom, peace and democracy in a sustainable environment. Draghi warns if Europe can no longer provide these to its people, or is forced to sacrifice one for another, it will have lost its reason for being. Bureaucracy is a big part of the problem. Draghi's report highlights that innovative companies looking to grow in Europe are hindered at every stage by inconsistent and restrictive regulations. As a result, a significant number of successful startups are choosing to leave the EU altogether. Europe's lack of affordable and reliable energy is another key reason for its falling competitiveness. In fact, in Europe, electricity prices are now 2 to 3 times higher than those in the US. And at times, electricity isn't available at all. A few years ago, for example, Swedish bread producer Pågen planned to expand its bakery but was denied because the power company simply could not guarantee a stable power supply.
Well, the consequence is that European continent will be deindustrialized.
What does that mean? Explain.
It means factories cannot function. We can't have high-paid industrial workers on the continent any longer. And you see the foreclosures, you see what's going on in Germany now. This is only the beginning. It's only going to get worse. How are you to produce and have competitive industry without reliable and reasonably cheap electricity? You can't.
And this is a blind spot for the EU. A significant part of the problem with access to affordable energy is precisely the green transition policies. The EU has legally mandated that member states achieve net zero within 25 years, meaning they must eliminate all carbon dioxide emissions beyond what can be naturally reabsorbed. This goal is presented as absolutely essential.
We all agree now across the political spectrum that we need a green transformation.
In less than 3 decades, we have to reach net zero.
But is that really true?
What does the science actually say about climate change?
The UN does every 7 years or so an enormous report that's 3 volumes, 1,600 pages. I don't recommend most people to read it, but it's actually really good in summarizing what the science tells us. And it says very clearly, there is a problem with climate change because we emit more CO2. It's going to cause higher temperatures, so we'll get higher sea level rise, we'll get more heat waves and so on. What will the total impact of all of these things be? Well, what they show, and this is the only climate economist who got the Nobel Prize in climate economics, the most quoted climate economist ever, when they've done their meta-studies, what they find is that the net impact in 100 years, so by 2100, will be in the order of 2 to 3% of global GDP. This means we'll be less well off, and that's a real problem. But to get a sense of proportion, this is not very much, 2 to 3% in 100 years. We estimate that the average person on the planet will be about 450% as rich as he or she is today.
However, in Brussels, there has long been a consensus that the green transition is the defining challenge of our time. And not only that, it must also be addressed with a particularly inefficient solution, namely wind power. The problem is that wind turbines don't generate power based on need, but based on the weather. This makes it difficult to ensure a stable and reliable energy supply. In Germany, known as the engine of the European industry, this policy has already had severe consequences. In 2011, Chancellor Angela Merkel launched the so-called Energiewende, aimed at phasing out fossil energy sources and even nuclear power. The problem is that in countries with limited capacity for hydropower, which means most European countries, nuclear power is the only energy source that is both available on demand and emission-free. In 2023, Germany shut down its last nuclear reactor. Yet its last coal plant will not close until 2038. This has made the consequences of losing reliable on-demand power painfully clear. Energy costs have soared, forcing factories to shut down or move abroad. Even Volkswagen, the pride of German industry, now faces the risk of factory closures.
Well, you look at the German economy now and how it is basically collapsing, and it's largely an effect of the Energiewende and that they have prematurely closed down functioning nuclear power in order to replace it with intermittent energy sources such as solar and wind. And you can see how German industry now crumbles because of that.
Can you give an example? How is it crumbling?
Well, you look at Volkswagen, and for the first time in, decades, they're laying off people, they're closing down factories. We are going through, it seems at present, an industrial suicide in Europe.
In 2024, the German economy shrank for the second consecutive year.
We have a choice to make. Either we try to accomplish a fossil-free society and maintain prosperity, jobs and wages at a decent level and keeping our industry, or we abolish nuclear power and we go the German way. And if we look at the German Energiewende, McKinsey here has just released a study which shows...
You show it to the camera just so they know.
Which shows that there is a way to accomplish a cheaper energy transition. And Germany is actually on its way to accomplish that. And that's by deindustrializing. Then lowering emissions will become cheaper. That is the only way. So if we lose our jobs, if we close down our factories, then the Energiewende can actually be accomplished. That's what McKinsey says.
Leading politicians have long claimed that the green transition will not harm Europe, but rather strengthen our competitiveness.
Our competitiveness is also increased because we deliver a regulatory framework which will give long-term security to investors and to economic operators. This is something the Americans aren't doing. So I think all in all, we're in a good competitive position.
It's true that growth can be driven by regulatory frameworks, as long as those frameworks protect the rule of law and promote free trade. But this is very different from regulations that simply make doing business more expensive. The EU's net zero policies include emissions trading, which steadily aims to raise the cost of using fossil fuels, which is still the source of 70% of Europe's energy. On top of that, these regulations come with a heavy bureaucratic burden, so-called ESG reporting. This means that companies must produce detailed sustainability reports under various directives, including CSRD, CSDDD, and the EU taxonomy regulation. This costs money, it takes time, and it adds to the growing strain on European businesses. Even the EU has begun to recognize this problem. In fact, in late February, the Commission proposed scaling back some of the reporting requirements in an attempt to salvage Europe's remaining competitiveness. But the central problem remains. Europe simply cannot survive without stable and affordable energy.
The result has been skyrocketing energy prices. It has been poor consumers, deindustrialization. That's where we are today.
Can you mention some of the consequences that would come out of deindustrialization, if that is what the path Europe chooses?
I mean, if we're talking about everyday life for people, we're talking about job losses, we're talking about lower wages, a reduced standard of living, very concretely. On the macro level, we're talking about a geostrategically worsened situation in which we will become the pawn of superpowers. We will definitely not be a superpower in and by ourselves, no matter how much the European Commission repeats the phrase strategic autonomy. We won't be having any autonomy. We will be ruled by China, by the United States and others. I'm a friend of the United States, but I want us to have an independent trade and foreign policy. We will see a lowering of emissions in Europe being well compensated by the establishment of production in other places such as the United States and China. So in total, the effect will not be there. But of course, the virtue signalers in Europe can feel fine about the European emissions.